This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Adam Carolla.
Yeah, get it on. Got to get on. The judgment's going to mandate. Get it on. Welcome the best 15 minutes or so in the universe. It's Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. I'm Adam Carolla. That's Mark Garrigus. And where, Mark?
The beautiful downtown LA. I actually got in the building today. I didn't have to do hand-to-hand combat. I feel like I've hit the lottery.
Well, maybe Dr. Alien was taking the day off. Now, we have a very special guest, Albert Watkins. And you say, who's Albert Watkins? Well, he recently went viral with a clip because Jacob Chansley is his client, QAnon shaman or Chewbacca man, the guy you know from the January 6th riot / insurrection, depending on what side of the aisle you're on. Mark saw a clip and Gary saw a clip, and we thought we'd play this clip. I guess it's outside the courthouse after the trial.
Looks like right after the sentencing.
So we'll set the table with the clip.
After spending this much time talking to Jacob Chansley and learning about him, what do you think is appropriate accountability for former president?
What do I think about his what?
What is an appropriate accountability for former President Trump?
Well, if you're asking my opinion, my opinion is meaningless. I will say that I would probably be far more effective over a beer with former President Trump, even if he didn't have a beer, because I understand he doesn't drink beer, but I'd have a beer. And I'd tell him, you know what? You got a few fucking things to do, including clearing this fucking mess up and taking care of a lot of the jackasses that you fucked up because of January 6th. Now, in the meantime, I might talk to him about some other things that I'd agree with him on. But my opinion doesn't mean shit.
So, Mark, as a practicing attorney, do you appreciate that kind of frankness and transparency?
I just have never pushed the envelope that far, I don't think, to just be that kind of concise, cogent, and try to distinguish between your role as a lawyer for a client and then your opinion, which, as he says, is meaningless and doesn't mean shit.
So I'm curious on how Albert got hooked up with Mr. Chansley. He, I think, just recently got 41 months or something like that, but there's some time served in there as well, because he's been in from just about Jump Street, right? Right.
So I would imagine 41 minus, if he got 41 minus the 8 actual, and depending on if he gets in one of the programs, he's got either 1 or 2 years left to do.
There's also a doc about him. I don't know if you guys saw that. I'm not sure where it is, Gary, but there's a doc on QAnon shaman, as he's known. And because after January 6th, I think on the 7th, he sat down and did an interview. I'm calling it a doc, but he did some interviews and stuff because at that point, he didn't know that he was in the kind of jeopardy that he later learned he was in, because I think just about everybody after the riot ended up just going back to their hotel room or back to their mom's house or whatever it is. And then at some point, the FBI came knocking on the door, probably in the pre-dawn hours. So we'll try to figure out how that whole thing transpired. But Gary, am I making that one up?
No, I do know that he gave some interviews before it was apparent to him how much trouble he was in.
And
Speaking of interviews, did you see the interview last night between Tucker Carlson and Kyle Rittenhouse?
I did not see the whole thing, but I saw a bit of it.
It's interesting. I mean, it was like a full. Kyle made the allegation that Lynn Wood and John Pierce had kept him in custody as a fundraising effort.
Yeah, there was a whole they basically said they went out and raised money for his bail, but they had it and he was still in and they didn't get him out. That's a pretty serious allegation, I'm guessing, Mark.
Yeah, I'm hoping that maybe Lynn calls us up and gives us his version of this, because Kyle didn't seem to be and then Mark Richards, I believe is the name of his defense lawyer, extremely able defense lawyer, says that he was, to further complicate matters, said that he kicked out Tucker's doc people or documentary people because he didn't approve of it, but that the people who were paying had requested it. It brings up one of the things, I don't know that we've commented on it, or I know I haven't, because it occurs to me when you've got a very able criminal defense lawyer and you've got Joellen Demetrius, who's the jury consultant, probably the best in the business, and you've got experts and you've got the resources. I mean, people can say, what does this say about the system? I mean, there's a compelling argument to be made that when you have the resources, that you can even out the fight, because generally it's the prosecution that's got unlimited resources, not the defense.
Well, I saw Rittenhouse's attorney, his second attorney on Cuomo the other night. He seemed like a pretty no-nonsense kind of guy. All right, Albert Watkins, attorney, is on now. So we zooming him in, Gary? So we should zoom in Jacob Chansley's. Again, he's known as a QAnon shaman. I think he just got 41 months. We'll pull up.
There he is.
He's there. Albert, can you hear us?
I can. How are you?
We're well. We're very impressed by your post-trial press conference, or at least a makeshift press conference. Mark's a fan and insisted.
It was one of those pathetic moments where at the end of a long federal sentencing and a heinously dumbed down press conference, that you get asked a question by somebody who's made up beautifully, tremendously attractive. The button is just not quite fully affixed at the right location. And she asked the stupidest fucking question in the world. And, there are times and occasions when you're, raised in the heartland of America where you just feel inclined to use the F-bomb and get your point across relatively quickly.
Well, do you feel, back to the nuts and the bolts, obviously your client became the poster boy for January 6th. And I don't know how much that factors into the sentencing, like setting an example for the supposed ringleader, even though he was sort of the de facto ringleader. I don't know if he was the ringleader. I don't know if there was a ringleader, but he certainly was the face of the insurrection of the riot. Do you feel like his sentencing was fair?
Look, let's call all of this for what it is. And I'm not trying to be overly simplifying this, but the guy was naked for 6 hours in Washington, D.C. in January before he entered the Capitol, with tattoos on his nipples and horns in his head, fur and a megaphone and a flag. Is he violent? No. Did he demonstrate violence? None whatsoever. He was not destructive. He wasn't threatening. And he sure as hell wasn't leading an insurrection to overthrow the government and have people follow him so that he can be in charge. He was, and I mean this quite literally, he was really a vulnerable young man. The guy is a savant. He's gentle. He's extraordinarily smart. He has a mental health disorder that was diagnosed in 2006, and nobody bothered to tell him. For 15 years, he had the opportunity to, had he known, to employ his intelligence and his overall commitment and discipline to getting the help that would have put him in a position of never, ever having been, Forrest Gump on crack on January 6th. This is a kid.
How much of his sentence would he have received if the news, it's hard to separate the Capitol and everything, but if the news wasn't so stacked against you and the outrage, and then people, obviously anytime Trump's name is evoked, there's a lot of reaction to it. Then they brought race into it, turned into a white insurrectionist. attack on the Capitol, and you heard all these Washington types pontificating about coming this close to losing our democracy, not since Pearl Harbor. Lots of hyperbole there. In a vacuum of that, what do you think a fair sentence would be for what he did?
A fair sentence would have been to get that kid some help in 2006. The government knew about it. The psych evaluation in 2021 confirmed that which the government already knew in 2006. The Department of Justice knew in 2021 that my client was in the military in 2006. The government deployed every resource known to mankind, and they are limitless resources to scrutinize and look into the background of each and every one of those criminal defendants before they charge them. You don't think for a second that the government didn't say, hey, wait a minute, that guy over there with the fur and the horns, the guy with the tattooed nipples, let's do the following. He won the best costume contest of the day. He is now, we're going to make him the face of the insurrection. Jacob Chansley, the shaman, he will be to January 6th what the swoosh is to Nike. And let's fry his ass. And ultimately, it went from 40 years to 20 years to a range of sentencing that ultimately got down to 41 to 51 months. And, this judge, who I personally admire and think the world of, he's an old line Reagan appointee from West Texas. And he believes very strongly in the integrity of a democracy. And he knew that he had to send a message. He felt it. And while I think the world of him, I think the appropriate sentence, if this was a case handled in a vacuum, not with all these intervening factors, I think he would have been sent home after 6 months in solitary confinement.
How do you feel about a lot of the discussion about FBI having their own guys, operatives, sometimes not necessarily agents, but maybe people affiliated or associated with the FBI in the crowd, sort of stirring the pot? There's been some sort of video of a certain gentleman that we can't really find the identity of, but he's cheering it on. Is that something that got covered inside the court? Is that something you have any information on?
Yeah, look, I filed motions with factual allegations that corresponded to various facts that do exist. And I gave videos to the government that the government did not have. At the end of the day, though, getting back to your vacuum illusion, which is really a pretty good one, when you are naked in front of a judge, and Mark will share the reality of this, when you are accused and you have entered a plea and it's sentencing showtime, even as a defendant's counsel, where it's not my ass on the chair, there's still this nakedness before the court where the integrity of your client's position has to be presented as credibly as possible. And at the same time, if you're going to be brazen enough to allow your client to pontificate spontaneously in front of a judge, there is a certain degree of testicular shrinkage that occurs on the part of counsel. And you have to be really confident in the genuineness of your client and the intellectual capacity of your client to navigate that process. And Jake had it. It was a beautiful and magnificent, genuine performance that was true. It was a true performance, not an acted performance.
Mark? Sorry, go ahead.
This guy, 20 minutes later, he was in an episode. And when you have that mental health issue, it's like, and Mark, bear with me, but you're right. I'm right. You go to a client, you say your case is worth 10 grand. It's not worth the 10 million you thought it was. They give you the authority to settle. You settle it for 10 grand. And 20 minutes later, he's calling you, telling you, fuck, where's my 10 million bucks? My buddy says we're 10 million.
But it's the same phenomenon. It happens daily in courtrooms and in law offices across the country. Been there, done that. But there's so much of I've said for years, the criminal justice system is dealing with the mental health issues and shouldn't be. I mean, it's the same thing out on the streets. The police and the sheriffs are dealing with mental health issues. Well, they're not trained for that. They have no business doing it. For some reason, we've decided at some point in our lifetimes, frankly, that we're going to shift the mental health system into the criminal justice system, and that's how we're going to do it. I remember the sheriffs here in Los Angeles County, I've said this to you countless times, Adam, successive sheriffs have told me, the last 4, that they run the biggest mental health system in the world, which is the LA County jails. And it's, that's on the state side. Then take it over to federal, and you have a very similar problem. Much of this intersection of the criminal justice system and the mental health collapse system is what we deal with daily.
Well, Mark, you're spot on. During the course of this case with Jake, the shaman, I watched the demise of my client before my very eyes. This intelligent, savant, gentle, kind human being falling into the mental health abyss. And I talked to the Department of Justice. I couldn't get the attention of the Bureau of Prisons. The court isn't armed. The assistant U.S. attorney isn't armed. And I'll be the first fucker to admit it. I'm not armed. Are you kidding me? I'm a pompous, egotistical, self-centered fuck. That's my job.
Wait, that's Mark's job. There's not enough room in this town for 2 pompous fucks.
But you understand, we aren't armed. And all of a sudden you have these people, when you realize it, they're our brothers, our sisters, our countrymen, our colleagues, our friends, the guy down the street that you have a beer with when you're washing your car. They're fine. They're under the bell curve of normalcy almost all the time. And they're holding it together. But you give them a socio-stressor, anxiety, some triggering event, and all of a sudden you're dealing with somebody who's driving down a goddamn parade in Wisconsin, or jumping around in the Senate chamber, waving on a flagpole and screaming shamanic chants. I mean, what? The best thing to do is to throw them into solitary confinement?
Well, I'll tell you the sad part. The sad part is the people that never stop talking about reform, prison reform, judicial reform, and mental health are the ones who want him locked away so that you can throw away the key. So that's an interesting juxtaposition. But Albert, for you, Mark and I talk about this. I talk about it a lot because I'm the layperson here, but it bothers me that politics is drifting into the courtroom and making or possibly helping to make decisions that should be within just the bubble of the courtroom. And, in someone like this judge you speak of, if he had gone lightly on your client, he would have been pilloried. I mean, he would have had a target on his back that would have doxed him, that would have found his name. I mean, they know his name, but he would have been destroyed on The View, on morning shows, on the internet. And you just don't want that factoring into his decision making. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think in this judge's case, that didn't factor at all. What factored was the fact that he's a human being with his own background, his own picadillos, and his own experience. This guy's a senior judge. He's been on the federal bench for 35 years or 34 years. All of us, whether it be Mark sitting in a comfortable T-shirt and hanging out on a podcast, or me with a corn cob up my ass wearing a suit, we all have our own respective experiences and our own background and pedigree, and quite frankly, our own unresolved childhood traumas that, in my case, render me unfit for public consumption. I have social Tourette's. I drop the F-bomb when I just get fucking pissed off. But we have no right to think that a human being in a black robe is not going to be affected by politics or external factors or his own beliefs. They don't live in a vacuum any more than we do. That's why, purportedly, our role as an advocate is designed to move that needle an inch. The best way to move that needle for me was to have a better judge, more favorably inclined to address my client's situation. That doesn't mean the judge is a better person. Just saying a better judge for that case. It's We're all humans.
How many months? How many months do you think your client's going to do? Is he going to do the full term?
Well, he got 41 months. He has 11 months already, so that's 30 left. He had 84.9% of the time under federal court, a good time, and this is not a violent man. He'll be out by Thanksgiving 2023. My guess is he'll be in a halfway house somewhere in May, June, or July of 2023. And in the meantime, if he plays his cards right and doesn't end up fucking things up, it may get better than that due to certain opportunities that are being accorded to him after sentencing. But we're right now in a position where I don't even know if I'm the attorney of record. That's the truth. As we sit here right now, I have a client that I've spoken with who's ecstatic, but I have another attorney who purportedly is telling me that he represents my client. Obviously, for post-sentencing motions for ineffective assistance of counsel, which is commonplace in federal court, well, I can't sue myself for ineffective assistance of counsel. Although, quite frankly, I'd probably serve as a better advocate than anyone else, because I'll be the first one to admit I'm capable of fucking up. But our system is screwed up, and vulnerable people are compromised as a result. And none of us, you, me, Mark, the courts, Department of Justice, Bureau of Prison, we're not the people to be handling this. We are woeful replacements for compassionate, patient, trained professionals.
Is Jacob ultimately happy with the sentence or relieved with the sentence?
No, I don't think anybody is happy. That doesn't mean that Jacob did not express respect for that judgment and respect for the judge, and he did an admirable job, even after the sentencing. But remember, when you are left alone and you have the anxiety and the stress that's associated with the reality of what's just happened, it's one thing to say, okay, 41 to 51 months. I get it. And then you're alone. And then you're angry. And then somebody whispers something in your ear. Well, if you had hired this attorney, give him a call. Shit, you'd be at home right now. Oh, your attorney talked about short buses. And it can be a really lonely and dark spot. And if you have a vulnerability, a disorder, and you don't get the help that you need, that's when the synapses start to really freak out. And the processing of nuances and of reality becomes a very cumbersome, distorted, and ugly process to watch.
Mark, last question. I'll let you have it.
What did you ask for?
Oh, I asked for him to go home. I said 6 months solitary, given the early diagnosis. This wasn't me hiring a whore to come up with a diagnosis of sentencing. This was a diagnosis by the government in 2006, never told to my client, and in 2021, reconfirmed by government site.
Yeah, that's what I expect. I mean, I would have expected. I mean, by the way, putting him in solitary confinement didn't exactly ameliorate the situation, probably exacerbated it beyond control, which it normally does. That's why I said we've got a criminal justice system that just is not equipped in any way, shape, or form to deal with mental health.
Hey, Albert, we want to thank you for joining us.
Albert, it was wonderful.
Hey, Mark, it's a pleasure meeting you, Mark. And Adam, I've got to tell you, I have a number of spawn, and the blood tests are in on most of them. The DNA, it's in sync, over 99.9%. I've got one of them that truly adores you to the point that I'm deeply troubled at the nature and character of this long-distance unilateral relationship that he has with you. I'll talk about it with you later.
Well, when he comes to L.A., he can come by the studio and we'll break some bread. Website, kwklaw.com, Albert Watkins. Thank you very much, Mr. Watkins. Appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen. A pleasure.
Thank you. Well,
there's a colorful attorney, Mark. Quite an interesting guy.
I told Gary I could hardly wait to meet him.
Yeah, interesting. And it's true when these guys go from cartoon characters, QAnon shaman, to sort of vulnerable adults with mental disorders. It just, it completely changes the theme. And it's sad that as a society, we have to cook up themes in order to get people incarcerated. All right. I want to thank Mark. I want to thank Albert. You can go to adamcarolla.com for all the live shows that are going to be up everywhere. And until next time, this is Adam Carolla for Albert Watkins and Mark Garagos saying mahalo.
Thanks for listening to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. Stay tuned for more bonus episodes coming soon.